welcome you to our attendee website hosted throughout CVINT. The website features a lot of different things, a list of all of our conference attendees. If you haven't had a chance yet, please go to the website or the app to update your profile, your bio, your social media info, really whatever you'd like to share with this group. This is a great way for us to get to know each other virtually. The website also features our conference schedule. The full list of conference sessions is listed in the website and the app. If you haven't done so already, you can select your session in advance and add those to your calendar so you don't miss anything. Games, we've got games. Check out the games. We've got fun ways to get more out of the conference and climb your way to the top of the virtual leaderboard. You can earn points by simply checking into a session via the Join Now button in each session. You can also rack up points by visiting our sponsors' virtual exhibit booths and see great content they have to share. And of course, in addition to bragging rights, we have prizes for those that get to the top of the leaderboard. First place prize, free conference registration to our 2022 conference, hopefully in person in Richmond, Virginia. Second place, 50% off your conference registration. Third place is 25% off your conference registration. Conference sponsors. Please see our sponsors tab. We're very, very appreciative of the numerous sponsorships that we've received this year for the conference. The conference and our work throughout the year would not be possible without the support of our top level sponsors, the Campbell Foundation and the National Wildlife Federation. Lastly, our conference hashtag. You'll see it in my virtual background. We encourage you all to use this on social media when sharing your photos and your experiences online. So before I turn things over, I want to express my gratitude to Kristen, Peter, Drew, Emily, and Amy Schofield for bringing all of this together. They each went above and beyond to make our annual conference so special. We could have not pulled this off without the support of one another. Now, I'd like to welcome Kristen Riley, our Coalition's Director, for her remarks.
Thank you, Mariah. Good morning, everyone. As Mariah said, my name is Kristen Riley. I'm the Director of the Choose Clean Water Coalition. I am so thrilled to be able to join you all this morning and to help kick off this conference. I know how much we all look forward to this event every year, and while we can't be in person, I am so glad to see all of your faces this morning, or your names at least on the screen virtually this morning. Before I introduce our first speaker, I just want to thank, as Mariah just did, our incredible Choose Clean Water Coalition staff. Planning this conference has not been an easy feat, and our team has faced a lot of challenges. This includes postponing in 2020, which if any of you have planned an event, which many of you do, you know it's very complicated to just postpone an event like that. Changing to and planning and engaging an innovative virtual setting for this year, which I think we have definitely achieved that feat. And then to top it off, we've lost 2 staff, myself included, to family leave. So a lot of difficulties and challenges that we faced this year. So a big thank you to our staff, Drew, Peter, and a real special shout out to Mariah and Emily, who really helped to pull this over the finish line while we were down 2 members. And I can honestly say, Mariah, we couldn't have done it without you too. So, and a very special shout out to Amy, our conference coordinator, who has been with us for 10 or 11 years now, Amy. I don't know which year we're in, and I'm going to stop counting so that you stick with us even longer than that. But thank you for all of your work. We would not have been able to do this without you again. And we're just so thankful that you all are joining us again this year, and here's hoping for in-person in 2022. It is now my honor to introduce our first speaker, Reverend Lennox Yearwood Jr. Reverend Yearwood is the president and founder of the Hip Hop Caucus, a nonprofit organization focused on addressing core issues impacting underserved and vulnerable communities. These issues include voting rights, economic justice, climate change, environmental justice, and many more. Reverend Yearwood is a leader in bridging the gap between communities of color and environmental issue advocacy. His work raises awareness and creates action in communities that are often overlooked by elected officials and traditional environmental campaigns. In addition to his work with the Hip Hop Caucus, Reverend Yearwood is also a minister, community activist, and a U.S. Air Force veteran. We are so excited to have Reverend Yearwood deliver a compelling message for us on the deep-seated connection between climate justice and racial justice, and what we can all learn from the story of Harriet Tubman and what she can teach us as we navigate a changing Chesapeake. With that, we are going to turn it over to Reverend Yearwood and his message for us.
Everybody, I am Rev Yearwood, president and founder of the Hip Hop Caucus, and I am so glad to be with you for a number of reasons. One, I live in the great state of Maryland, the free state, and living here in Maryland, I get to benefit all of the joys of being next to the Chesapeake Bay. And because of that, I get to also benefit from all of the hard work that you do to keep our bay clean and protected and resourceful. So for the over 260 organizations, I hope I got that correct, who are part of this coalition, thank you for me and for my family, all of us who benefit from living here and living next to the Chesapeake Bay. I'm coming to you from the occupied territory of the Piscataway Nation here in Maryland, and we call it, as you know, the DMV, District, Maryland, and Virginia area. And wanted to thank you for having me to engage with you in this conversation at this critical time. I know that the topic of the discussion is a changing Chesapeake, and I wanted to focus on that from a number of different angles. One, obviously, a changing climate, and two, a changing community. So to just kind of get into it, the first part is actually the short part. That's the easy part of this conversation, a changing climate. Most of you know what is happening to our Chesapeake Bay, and you know what's happening there within the wetlands and the marsh and the rising water levels and just losing land, so many different problems that we're having in regards to the changing climate. And it is something that is literally going to change the landscape and is changing the landscape for which we live. And so it's something that we have to take very seriously that impacts those who are on the Eastern Shore, to those who are living in urban communities from Upper Marlboro to Baltimore. You know, we all have an impact that we have to deal with, to do all we can to transition from fossil fuels to clean energy. And we must do that as soon as possible. And one of the ways that we must do that is through policy. And so I want to commend those, particularly in Virginia, for those who are listening, in Delaware and in Maryland, who have been doing so much to create some of the most progressive, just important climate legislation. There are things we could do further in Maryland, and there are a few things we could do further in Delaware. But big shout out to Virginia. My goodness, y'all are laying it down in creating true climate policy to deal with the climate crisis. But the most important thing, I think, that you are all coming together from all different types of ways and many different organizations to address the climate crisis that is impacting all of us who live in this region, and definitely all those who benefit and need a healthy Chesapeake Bay. So that's the climate crisis, or the changing climate. The other part to this is probably a little bit longer, and that is the part dealing with a changing community. And that part really comes together, and why I think I'm here, because it's the conversation of the day. It's a conversation we're dealing with simply is, how do we connect the dots? How do we come together and use and understand that climate justice is racial justice and racial justice is climate justice? And how does that have an impact on our changing Chesapeake? How does this all come together? Well, I love to tell stories. And so I think, sometimes, truth is stranger than fiction. And so I want to lead with this story because one of the most famous Marylanders, one of the most famous people who have ever lived next to the Chesapeake Bay was Harriet Tubman. And recently, as some of you may or may not know, we recently found the remains of Harriet Tubman's father's house over there next to the Chesapeake Bay. And we found Ben Ross's home where Harriet grew up. And it was right there near the bay and next to the wetlands. And they say if they had not found a home this year, that it would have been destroyed because of, or you couldn't have found it because of the marsh and the wetlands and just climate change. It would have literally destroyed the eroding aspects of where that home is. And so we are losing literally artifacts. But I wanted to bring that story because one of the things about that story that was interesting was the fact that with Harriet Tubman, they said that she learned to deal with the Underground Railroad and how to free slaves by navigating the wetlands and the marsh of the Chesapeake Bay. Now, that's important, and that's almost just get some of you excited, because when you think about that, Harriet Tubman, the leader of the Underground Railroad, the one who would free slaves, who would go and come back into some of the most treacherous encampments you can imagine, that would be where she would learn, next to Chesapeake Bay, in those wetlands, in those marshes, how to escape, how to navigate, and how to live. If you think about it, we're very similar today. That same aspect of navigating along those shores of the Chesapeake Bay, navigating those wetlands and those marshes, navigating that territory to set people free is still happening today. It's amazing how we can look back at Harriet Tubman and understand that she would understand that nobody is free until everybody is free. And we can fast forward to today and see the exact same thing. And what we can learn from navigating those marshes and those wetlands. So the first thing is this, is that we have to do all we can to protect the Chesapeake Bay and to reverse the effects of climate change before we lose our history. That's the first thing. The second thing is just like Harriet Tubman, we have to get outdoors and navigate so we can see how to navigate those lands around us to ensure that we are not foreign to the ways that we need to be. Third, there's a direct connection between racial justice and climate justice. Harriet Tubman was born a slave. And many Black people still feel that we are living in a system where we're trying to escape white supremacy and oppression. And just like she did, we have to link up and use our natural environments to escape our oppression right now. And so what we can see is that with Harriet Tubman, you can see how we still today have to connect the dots so that our changing community, where we are today, literally fighting still for racial justice, is directly connected to climate justice. But the question is this question I mentioned earlier: how do we do that with our changing community? I'm so glad you had me, because one of the things that's been coming up more and more is that our movement has somehow disconnected the racial justice with the climate justice. They've disconnected the fact that there are Black folks still running for freedom. They've disconnected the fact that even though there are situations that are engulfing Black people who are on the front lines, first and worst, hit by the climate crisis, those who are the Harriet Tubmans of today who are living next to the crisis, they forget that. And so we have to now recalibrate our movement so that we can, again, put ourselves in a position where we can fight for justice. But let's first go back, as we all know. First thing that we must know is that our movement right now, as it is set up, is a movement that has to literally do all it can to diversify and ensure equity and inclusion. Because as it is maintained now, it will not work. And so I'm excited you having me, because the only way that we can do a changing Chesapeake is we have a changing community that is truly changing, and a community that is coming together that can affect a changing Chesapeake. And so we must then all come together and utilize all of our resources in that aspect. But how do we do that when we have a movement that has for years kind of become ingrained, somewhat, just removed itself from other groups and other communities, that seems foreign to even talk about the things that are dealing with our community? That's the hard part. But I think that what we have been doing, Hip Hop Caucus, has been really working on that. And that's really been about storytelling. Not just about Ben Ross and Harriet Tubman, but storytelling. We've done things like we did a We Shall Breathe summit recently that got literally hundreds of thousands of views, in which we were connecting these dots we talked about in regards to racial justice and climate justice, and climate justice and racial justice. You can still see it at weshallbreathe.com and enjoy that summit, which has a wealth of information about how to connect the dots. But it was more so about in the messaging, the style, the visual, just the excitement, the kind of how it was edited, those kind of things, to broaden the movement, to bring them in, to tell them to show them a different way of telling the story. That's one aspect of this. The second aspect of this is just definitely in ensuring the front lines and front lines communities are the ones who are telling their story. Simply put, they're the ones who are most impacted. Those Harriet Tubmans of today have to be the ones to tell the story and be the ones to articulate what they are going through. They are the ones who, they lead the way in a new climate underground movement. They're the ones who will lead us to freedom. And we must allow for the front line and the front lines communities, those who are most vulnerable, those who are in the sacrifice zones, to be the ones to tell the story, to lead the story, and to be the story. And if we do that, then those are the ones who can impact a changing Chesapeake, and to be honest, a changing world. The last thing is this: not just in the media or the telling the story, but it's also in how we are resourcing these communities. The one thing that I've noticed for too long is that we have not resourced and created the infrastructure that needed to bring on new allies and new movements, new people to our movement. We have to figure out a way to share these resources, to open up our infrastructure, so that next time I talk to you, it will be not just 260, maybe 2,060, because we've grown so much. And we need that to deal with the crisis we are in. So I just want to say that, this is a very difficult time, for sure, that we're living in. We're dealing with so many different things: pollution, poverty, a pandemic, and police brutality, and racist policies. It's a very difficult time for all of us. And sometimes things like Chesapeake Bay can get pushed to the back. But as our dear friends have told us, our dear Indigenous sisters and brothers, many with Shoney, water is life. So we must do everything we can to ensure that the Chesapeake Bay is upheld. We must deal with a changing climate. We must endure and change a changing community. We must ensure that our movement understands simply that racial justice is climate justice. And we must find our Harriet Tubmans for the 21st century. Because if we do that, if we really do that, then we can be free of fossil fuels. And we can survive. I just want to thank y'all so much for having me. I hope your conference is just amazing. I hope you take serious what I've said about us coming together in the moment that we're in. Thank you so much from the bottom of my heart, and all power to the people.
Thank you to Reverend Yearwood for that powerful message, connecting the dots between racial and climate justice. With environmental justice at the heart of our work for clean water, it's a privilege to hear from one of the leading voices in the EJ community. As a National Parks Advocacy organization, I was thrilled that Reverend Yearwood shared the story of Harriet Tubman and shared the parallels to today. Tubman was a naturalist. She navigated through the Chesapeake Bay for freedom. She used the night sky to escape and return. And she shared her story, which lives on today. So the fact that the parallel is that today we need to look to community leaders and the impacts that are ongoing to these communities. And as Reverend Yearwood said, let them share their stories. And as we advocate for infrastructure and clean water, we need to make sure that the impacted communities on the front line of environmental justice and climate change are beneficiaries to create true allyships. Now we're very honored to have Radika Fox join us today to deliver our keynote address. At a time when our nation faces a global pandemic and fight for justice, her leadership, steadfastness, and commitment to racial justice is needed. Radika Fox is a visionary and a unifying leader. Throughout her career, she's fought tirelessly for those at the forefront of environmental justice. Her passion and experience fighting for equitable access to clean drinking water and water quality protections will greatly serve the 18 million people who live in the Chesapeake Bay watershed. Her recent appointment as the Principal Deputy Assistant Administrator for the EPA's Office of Water signals a commitment from the federal government to address barriers and threats to public health and a thriving environment. We are excited and proud of her appointment, as she will bring a fresh and much needed voice for change to the EPA. So please join me in welcoming Radika Fox.
Hi, good morning, everybody. It's wonderful to be with you. I'm Radika Fox, and I have to say I'm still in California for a couple more weeks before my family moves to DC. So it's great to begin my week with all of you. It's an honor I see some familiar faces, and great to meet some new folks on this line. I understand this is the first time that your meeting is being hosted virtually, and I know it will be productive, but I also can't wait to have the opportunity to meet with all of you face to face when the water community can really start to reconvene in person. Thank you for the lovely introduction, Pam. And what I want to start off by saying is that I truly believe that this is water's moment. I have never seen water elevated in the national conversation like it is right now. We're seeing a historic call for investment in water infrastructure through President Biden's American Jobs Plan. There's bipartisan support for water legislation in Congress. And, it's been absolutely fabulous to see the president and the vice president tour multiple water facilities across the nation over the last couple of months. And I think, I feel like in some ways it's that leaders in Washington are catching up to what you all as community leaders have known for a long time, which is that, water is the great uniter. It can unite the nation. It can really bring us together and also pull us out of the compounding crises that communities are struggling with: the COVID-19 pandemic, economic recession, the call for racial justice, and also how we tackle the climate crisis. So I want to talk a little bit about some of these priorities: equity, infrastructure, and climate, because I know those are very important to your coalition and to the future of the Chesapeake Bay. So on equity, it has honestly been a personal dream come true to join an administration and to really see a president and a vice president prioritizing equity and environmental justice like I think never before when it comes to a presidential administration. My boss, EPA Administrator Michael Regan, has, for example, also directed all of the national program offices, including the one that I lead, the Office of Water, to consider equity and environmental justice in all of what we do in our office. And so my team and I have really been thinking about what that means as a federal agency. And so some of the things that we're thinking about around how we can support community leaders such as yourselves in advancing equity is, first, we have to make sure that all people have access to safe and reliable drinking water services. Second, if we do make big investments in our water infrastructure, how do we make sure that the jobs that are created, that the business opportunities that are generated are really equitably spread? And finally, we know that low-income people and communities of color are hit first and worst when it comes to the climate challenge. So we really need to center what we do at the EPA with those who are most vulnerable. So right now within the Office of Water, we're developing our equity action plan around how we can help make progress on those three things. And as we get further along, really look forward to sharing that with you and thinking about the collaborations that could happen in the Chesapeake Bay as a result of this. Infrastructure, this is a huge moment, I think, for water infrastructure. For example, the President's American Jobs Plan really calls for many of the things that our vulnerable communities have needed for so long. For example, the American Jobs Plan calls for $45 billion to remove 100% of lead service lines. And we know that this is a public health risk that disproportionately impacts low-income communities and communities of color. I think, have so much possibility through the American Jobs Plan because we're going to be utilizing existing funding and financing mechanisms to deliver these resources to communities. I understand also that the Choose Water Coalition also is doing a lot of fantastic work around making sure that communities have the data and the tools, the information really that they need to engage robustly in water making decisions in their communities. This is an area that I really am excited about the work that EPA is doing and an area I think we can do more together. For example, we have a tool, it's an app called How's My Waterway, and it really is a great compilation of information around water quality, the impacts on recreation, drinking water, aquatic life. And so if you haven't checked it out, the data for the Chesapeake Bay watershed is really quite wonderful. And I hope that it can be a resource to your coalition as you are communicating the needs and challenges in a very visual way. The last thing I wanted to touch on is the climate crisis. This is an issue I know that your coalition has been spending a lot of time and bringing a lot of leadership to. In last month's Leaders Summit on Climate, President Biden took executive action to ensure that we can tackle the climate crisis both at home and abroad while creating jobs and strengthening our economy. And I think that in the context of the water sector, we have so much opportunity to be part of the solution, both by making these investments in infrastructure so that our systems are resilient to the stresses and shocks of climate change, but also that the water sector can really be part of our 2035 goal of cutting greenhouse gas reductions. And so that is an area I think we have so much collaboration opportunity as well. And, you know, in many ways, these issues around equity, the need for infrastructure, climate resilience, all can come together in the context of place, and places like the Chesapeake Bay watershed. You know, it's pretty notable that nearly 1.3 million acres of land in this watershed have been protected since 2010. And there are incredible restoration efforts that are underway. You know, I can certainly say the EPA will continue to support those restoration efforts with funding, technical assistance, and coordinating partnership efforts through the Chesapeake Bay Program Office. So we, you know, in many respects feel like the work that's happening in the Chesapeake Bay can really be a model for the nation around partnerships and collaboration. So anyway, it is just absolutely wonderful to be with all of you. Thank you for the work that you are doing on behalf of our nation's waters. Thank you for your commitment to equity and justice. And I really look forward to our ongoing partnership with all of you moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Radhika, for joining us today. We know how busy you are, and we know all the incoming agency officials are just, I'm sure, swamped, and everybody wants to talk to you. So we so much appreciate you being here. We look forward to partnering with you and serving as a resource for you. We are throughout the watershed, and if you ever need anything or have any questions, we are here for you. So thank you so much. We're very excited to have you at the EPA.
Thank you, Pam. And I would absolutely love to connect with the coalition when I'm out there and we're all starting to gather in person. So that would be wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a really exciting morning for everybody. And our first block of upcoming sessions are: can different ingredients bake similar TMDL cakes? Virtual or in person? What do meetings look like post-COVID? Volunteer science and public engagement, interest-based negotiation and conservation, and positional power. How can boards help to advance DEIJ? Our second block of sessions will feature 3 additional breakout sessions, and they begin at 11:30 a.m. and they include environmental justice and equity map, healthy soils for a healthy bay, and how to get your organization in the news. Next, join us for a roundtable discussion or a virtual field trip from 12:30 to 1:15 p.m. if your schedule allows. The virtual field trip is hosted by the American Dairy Association Northeast and will feature trips to 3 dairy farms and live question and answers with the farm owners. We also have 3 roundtables set up. The first is all things Conowingo Dam. The second is linking water quality and flood resilience community co-benefits. And the third is legal assistance and enforcement with the Chesapeake Legal Alliance. Finally, I want to extend on behalf of the coalition a big thank you to our Rockfish level sponsors. They are the Chesapeake Bay Foundation, the Maryland League of Conservation Voters, Mom's Organic Market, the Piedmont Environmental Council, the Environmental Defense Fund, and the National Parks Conservation Association. We hope you enjoy the rest of today's sessions. We look forward to seeing everybody back again tomorrow for the plenary at 10:15 a.m. And don't forget, tomorrow is Clean Water Oasis Day, and we encourage everyone to change their virtual background to show off their favorite place in the watershed. Thanks, everybody.